Close the door. Yeah, okay. Good evening and welcome. So let me start by a brief introduction. The Good Food Institute is an international nonprofit organization working to make the global food system better for the planet, the people, and the animals. Powered by philanthropy, we work across the globe to advance alternative protein as a major climate solution and part of the global food systems, where the major reason is the current meat consumption. Current meat consumption is the highest it's ever been. And according to the UN, it is going to increase by 50 to 100% by 2050. The problem with that is that current meat production is not the most efficient way of making meat. It takes 9 calories fed to a chicken to get 1 calorie of meat back, which basically means we need to invest 9 times more energy and more natural resources to get the output that we need. And the conversion rate for the other animals is even worse. On a global scale, the vast majority of the crops that we grow is not fed to human, it's fed to farm animals, while at the same time, hundreds of millions of people are malnourished because they don't have access to high quality protein. So globally, we grow the crops, we feed the animals, we ship the animals, we operate the slaughterhouse, we invest a lot of energy, which is causing pollution. In addition, 70% of all antibiotic consumption globally is not given to sick people, rather to farm animals, which is causing a trend of bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics. And the UN has predicted this to be the #1 cause of death by 2050 if nothing is changed. So how do we feed 10 billion people by 2050 and do it in a sustainable, efficient, and safe way, while industrial animal agriculture is responsible for almost 15% of all greenhouse gas emission and 70% of agricultural land? For over 50 years, people have been advocating to reduce the consumption of meat. Yet, meat consumption has been increasing, and it's the highest it's ever been. We are not trying to change human behavior. What we are trying to do is to change the way we are making meat. And we are doing that using alternative protein technologies. Using alternative protein technologies, we can make fish, meat, eggs, dairy products from plants and from cultivation technologies. We can make products that taste, smell the same as the traditional animal agriculture products without the environmental consequences. Fortunately, these technologies come with a huge economic potential. a market that is anticipated to be worth hundreds of billions of dollars by 2040. And the private sector has identified it, and governments have been identifying it. And among them, the Israeli government, who just 2 months ago has declared food tech and alternative protein to be one of the top 5 priority areas for the next 5 years for the Israeli government, meaning that it's going to invest in developing this innovative ecosystem into an industry, an ecosystem that comprises today of over 55 companies across the technology area and across the commercialization stages. Israel today is ranked second, just after the US, in terms of investments in alternative proteins. 18% of all global investments in the field are to alternative protein companies. The Israeli Academy and the scientific landscape is highly involved in the field, and over 50% of academic knowledge is commercialized to startups. And while some tech investments saw decline during the first half of 2022, alternative proteins continue to increase 160%. So when we are thinking of the government role, why and how do we believe governments should operate in the field? The main property of all these companies is their intellectual property. Government can invest in developing R&D, which is open access, and boost and promote the entire industry and field. For this, to leverage this innovative ecosystem, we have been working in the past year, along with the Israeli government, in promoting a national policy plan that could leverage this innovation and transform it into an industry, an alternative protein industry. We have identified the areas where the private sector doesn't address and the government can have a major role, such as the research, the infrastructure, and the regulation. Investing in creating a research center where more academic collaboration can happen, investing in developing innovation hubs where pilot and scale-up processes could happen, and constructing a regulatory framework for companies to be able to continue and develop in Israel. And considering this investment, the gains are not negligible. Considering these investments, Israel could benefit from a significant increase in the amount of jobs, the opening of new startups, factories, multinational companies that will in turn open innovation centers in Israel, taxations from startup and mature companies, while at the same time being able to meet its climate commitments and being able to strengthen the national food security. This is going to be a new food system. This is going to be a new value chain, and it is time for more governments to find their role in this supply chain, from agriculture, raw material, production, market demand, and distribution. Companies need to find a role in this innovative ecosystem. And with these investments comes benefits, national benefits, economical growth, national food security, and climate obligations. And with this, I would like to invite the panelists for today's session. Professor Noga Kornfeld-Shor, Chief Scientist of the Israeli Ministry of Environmental Protection. Didier Touvier, co-founder and CEO of Aleph Farms. And Gidon Bachar, a special envoy for climate, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And maybe before we dive into some questions, Gideon, the floor is yours.
Can we turn on the slideshow? So, in my presentation here, I would like to speak about the impacts of the livestock industry on climate change and also on the food security issue. So let us start with this map. This map shows us the situation of hunger in the world according to the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United States. And what we can see here, we can see that approximately 1 billion people are in different stages of hunger. So hunger still persists in the world, and there are many more other people who suffer from malnutrition and lack of proteins. So hunger is there, and we need really to find ways to alleviate it. This slide shows us the rise in the prices of food in different commodities. And what we can see here, that there is a start in the rise of different commodities already 2 years ago, regardless of the war with Ukraine. The war with Ukraine gave it an additional rise. So price indexes of food are rising, and we see that there is a very significant and negative impact on food prices around the world, and this is not related only to one event, namely the war with Ukraine or the corona crisis, but this is a global trend. This is a very interesting slide. It shows us how much of a terrestrial area of the world we use for agriculture and how much of that is being used actually to grow animals and their feed. So what you can see here, that about 30%, I repeat, 30% of all the land mass area of the world is dedicated for agriculture. And if you take into consideration that another 30% is deserts, is ice, etc., it means that we, human, took approximately half of the arable land of this planet for our needs. And the amazing thing here is that 75% of all of this agricultural land is used to grow animals and their feed. Not to feed us, but to feed the animals that we eat. Okay, so the effects of the livestock industry on the planet is really huge, and indeed more than 20% of all the emissions, and some people will tell you even more than 20% of all the emissions of CO2 and other greenhouse gases is because of a livestock industry. Let me say it in other words. If today we stopped eating animals or milk, we will not cross the 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. We will cross it because we continue to eat animals. That's it, very simple and said. Now, if you look at the emissions, then you will see that if cows were a republic, they would come third as a republic in the emissions of greenhouse gases, with about 5 billion tons of CO2 per year. So this is really enormous, and it has huge effects on our climate and our biodiversity. And now let's have a look at this slide. And we see here how many kilograms of CO2 are emitted to produce 50 grams of proteins. And we see number one, beef. In order to produce 50 grams of protein, we emit 18 kilograms of CO2. Lamb is about 10 kilograms. Cheese requires from us more than 5 kilograms of CO2 to produce 50 grams of cheese. So next time that you go and you buy, a sandwich with cheese, yellow cheese, remember that only this cheese has created 5 kilograms of CO2. But when we come to other non-animal products, like tofu, like beans, like nuts, you see that the results are very, very low, and they produce almost no emissions at all. In this slide, you can see also how much water each of these animals or products require in order to produce. And remember that in addition to the climate crisis, we are today in a water crisis worldwide. There is not enough water for all of our needs. And very soon we'll see countries and nations go thirsty, which is already happening in big parts of Africa. Let's have a look again in how much water is being used to produce 1 kilogram of beef. Astonishing 1,500 liters and more are needed to produce 1 kilogram of beef. Pork, it's about 6,000 liters. Even chicken, which is so, has a little effects considered or compared to pork or to cows, demands lots of water. But let's have a good at the look stuff. Tomato requires only 200 liters. Broccoli, almost 300 liters. So all plant-based food requires relatively very small amounts of water. And remember that water means emission, because we have to dig the water, we have to ship the water, we have to use energy, and then we have to get rid of the waste. Everything requires energy and emissions. And now let me speak about the future. In this slide, you can see two possible futures. One of them is the future that we want, to see more production of cultured meat, of alternative proteins. And we see that if we do that, then there will be also great economical benefits for companies who do that, and that we will reduce emissions. And we can really, with the industry of alternative proteins, reduce in half the demand for global proteins, especially proteins that come from the livestock. In this slide, I would like to speak with you about our efforts in Israel, as a government, as Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to advance the issue, the field of alternative proteins. Actually, it has become a core idea in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We support it a lot. Our embassies, consulates, diplomats are engaged in promoting the idea of alternative proteins, because we know the tremendous contribution it can make both for food security and for mitigating the climate change. And here you can see some of the examples. You can see our ambassador to the United Nations, Gilad Erdan, having an event with alternative proteins in the United Nations headquarters in New York, celebrating and eating alternative proteins coming or produced by Israeli companies. And here you see another event that took place just 2 months ago at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Jerusalem. We've invited all the ambassadors and consul generals who reside in Israel to an event dedicated to alternative proteins with a message that this is the future of a food tech. That if we want to assure food security for the world, if we want to reduce greenhouse gases, if we want to save what little has remained from our biodiversity, we must tackle the way how we eat and change our diets and move into alternative proteins. And here you see another event also organized by the Israeli embassy in Rome, the embassy to the United Nations, to the FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization, also promoting alternative proteins. This is a message that Israel can bring to the world. When we are talking about climate change, what we see that there is a lack of solutions, not enough solutions are there. No solutions which are practicable, applicable, scalable, and this is one of the main solutions to the climate crisis. So we really have to push it, we really have to strengthen it and to aid the development of alternative proteins. So, I will say that alternative proteins are an issue which is extremely important for us at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, both for climate change, food security, and we see also the huge potential it has for us as a country, for the economy, and for international cooperations with other partners across the world. So, to summarize, livestock industry has an unbearable impact on the planet, on biodiversity, on climate change, and it hampers, it affects negatively food security around the world. And that alternative proteins can free huge areas which are used today for animal cultivation and make them free to serve as sinks which will absorb CO2 and greenhouse gases. This is another huge contribution alternative proteins can make in our fight against climate change. I will just say that Israel is a world leader in the field of the development of alternative proteins. We want to share our expertise and know-how with everyone in the world, either in developed countries or developing countries as well, and only by cooperation and by developing of groundbreaking ideas and solutions that we can make a real contribution to mitigate the negative effects of climate change. So thank you very much. Again, my name is Gideon Bechar, Ambassador and Special Envoy for Climate Change and Sustainability of Israel. Toda rabah.
Thank you so much, Gideon. It's always super enlightening to see the amount of support that the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs is providing to the field. I'd like to ask the first question, you, Didier. We've discussed briefly about the need for government support in the field. And we are discussing about the need for more governments to acknowledge the potential. Gideon mentioned a few examples of how the Israeli government is seeing it. How does the private sector sees it? What kind of short-term commitments could governments adopt in order to promote the field?
Thank you, Ala, and a great presentation. Thanks, Gidon. There are a lot of areas of potential collaboration and necessary collaboration between the public and private sector. I'd like first to explain in a couple of sentences what Aleph Farms is doing. Aleph Farms is one of the pioneers in the field of cultivated meat, meaning that we grow meat from the ground up, from the cells, which are the same building blocks as the meat which is today harvested from the carcass of a slaughtered animal, which we're able to foster and to promote outside of an animal in a controlled environment. And we believe that the main areas of collaboration should be three. The first one is to make sure that, globally speaking, the incentives are directed toward good practices in agriculture, and we should stop subsidizing or supporting practices which are detrimental to the soil health and to the climate, socially detrimental as well, and redirect those subsidies and this financial support toward practices which are regenerative and sustainable. The second area of interest to us is really to work on plans and projects to support the initial stages of scaling up new technologies, same as renewable energy, such as solar panels or electric vehicles in the car industry. Those new technologies will be more expensive when they launch, and we do need to benefit from some financial support from the governments and the public entities to help us bridging the gap of the first few years of scaling up our production capacities and reach price parity, so that we can continue and drive the impact we're aiming at delivering. And the third aspect is on regulation. Israel has been quite proactive in this space with a very interesting program, a pilot program between the Ministry of Health and the Israel Innovation Authority. We've seen other countries being very proactive as well, like Singapore, for instance. We really need to build frameworks for those new technologies to be able to launch, to pave the ground, to open the way for new technologies to be assessed in a relatively quick and efficient manner, and to support those new companies with approvals which can help launching those products quicker and reach a larger scale.
Thank you. You mentioned the comparison to the traditional animal agriculture and potential incentives or taxation that exists there. Israel today is highly reliant on food imports, especially in protein, especially in beef. Over 80% of the beef that is consumed in Israel is based on imports. So Noga, most of the climate impacts or consequences of the growth of these cattle are not in Israel. However, Israel is doing some work to consider this.
Hear me? Yes. So I'm chairing an interministerial committee for promoting affordable, sustainable, and healthy food systems. And under this committee, we have one committee that deals with the food that is imported to Israel. And we deal with this food from several reasons. One is food security, and the other is that we can't ignore the effects of the food that we consume in other countries, especially in a country where more than 80% of the calories that we consume are imported, and further, about 80% of the beef that we consume is imported. So we actually started two studies, one by the Ministry of Intelligence, looking at the sources of all the food that we consume, which turns out to be difficult to identify, because when we import food, it's listed on the country that is selling it, and normally it's not the country that produces the food. So we're actually trying to see what the source where the food is being grown, and then analyze climate risks at the source country to from one side to show that import is not a solution, because we can't, once food security will reduce in other countries, they will prefer selling the food to their citizens and not exporting it to other countries. But also because we actually, by importing food, we increase harm to the environment, and we increase global change in other countries. So the first is to identify what the food source is, and another group is working on global gas emissions of animal protein in the source country. So we joined the FAO, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, and we are now conducting a huge study, which is expected to take between a year or a year and a half, where we map the source of the animal protein product, and then analyze all the environmental implications in the source countries, as well as in Israel, try to understand what the whole field of animal protein in Israel is causing. And I think that at the moment, what we do is say that animal protein in Israel is not an issue, because we don't grow a lot of animal protein, especially not beef, but this is because we import it. So we still cause a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. And it's also important to state that Israel is fourth in the world in consuming beef per person, and at the same time we have the second highest percentage of vegetarians and vegan people. So it means that the ones that consume beef consume huge amounts of beef, and we are also the first in chicken consumption. So this is something that we should deal with also from a health perspective, not only from an environmental perspective. And I hope that having the data will help convince the relevant decision makers that we should change the way we consume food, produce food, and pollute the environment.
This is such an innovative way of looking at it. There are so many other countries around the world which are highly dependent on imports, but don't recognize the consequences and the environmental ramification of the growth in the origin country. So I think that I'm looking forward to seeing the results of this study, and it's also super important because at the end of the day, we cannot look just on Israel, such as any other country cannot look just at its own country. We are dependent on other countries, such as other countries depend on us in some areas. So this really touches the area of food security, being dependent on other countries in such a volatile and unstable current supply chain of meat. Didier, are there any collaborations in the field, in the areas of food security that the private sector is interested in and can take place?
Yes, definitely. And I believe Gideon can also elaborate on that maybe afterwards. We do see food security as a joint challenge, a shared challenge in the Middle East, and collaborating on solutions together will be a way to tighten the ties and the bonds between the different countries in the region, to foster collaboration in the region and potentially improve the political stability of the Middle East. At Alphonse, for instance, we are very much involved with the UAE. The sovereign wealth funds of Abu Dhabi, ADQ, is invested in our company. And we're working on different programs. We just launched at COP our Aim for Climate initiative, our innovation sprint, which is originally a UAE and US initiative, now joined by, I believe, 275 countries and NGOs. And we're also working closely with Singapore. Singapore also invested public money in Ale Farms to develop the connection with the company and implement this type of new approaches to produce high quality nutrition locally, independently to the climate and to the availability of land and water. And we believe that food security being such a critical issue for more and more countries in the world, this collaboration is really the base and the foundation for a lot of new economical and political developments.
Gideon, would you like to add anything on the food security element and specifically the region of Israel?
I think that very few people are aware how much our food security is fragile. I mean, we are accustomed to go to supermarkets and to buy everything that we want, and everything is in hand, reaching of a hand, and supply is there. But this is only, I would say, an illusion because we are always just one step from a world crisis in the field of food security. And in the last 2.5 years, we were very close to worldwide food crisis. One, during the Corona time, where countries started to restrict exportation of food from their territories, and prices started to rise up in the world. And once again, after the war in Ukraine started and there was a blockade of wheat exports, oil, maize, and other agricultural products from Ukraine. So food security in the world is very, very fragile, and we really do not understand it. And one of the methods, the ways that we can increase our food security is by having capacities and capabilities to produce food just in our homes without being able to rely on faraway countries to buy from them our food or our demands in food. So alternative proteins not only reduces emissions, it grows also food security, and it improves also the livelihood of many millions of people around the world who are suffering from malnutrition. I can tell you personally, I was ambassador in Senegal and to 4 other countries in Western Africa, and I've seen firsthand hungry people. In many of these countries, people eat only once a day. Okay, people are really struggling to have a proper meal per day. Sometimes they go a whole day without a meal. So if we can have another source which is affordable, which is cheap, which is secure from a point of view of health, which is that it is accessible to everyone, and this is alternative protein, we can really improve the health, the nutrition of so many people around the world. This is really a game changer that we didn't have before, and it demands much more attention that it is giving today. It cannot be left only on the shoulders of pioneers like Didier or Ale Farms or Remilk or other companies and startups. There must be an organized effort by government and international organizations to develop the field.
I will not argue on that. Are there any questions? Yes.
What a fabulous panel. Thank you. Since I have so many from the ministry here, and the last comment from Gideon was really about the government. Why this is not new news, correct? That we've got some food security issues and so large percentage of the food comes from outside of Israel. Why hasn't the infrastructure or the preparations for the future of food security, even if you just want to box it into that thing, been prepared sooner to now? Why are we just coming to the table to talk about it? The reason for the question is Didier has a super innovation, but now in order to scale, to roll out, to do that, he's also got to build the infrastructure and convince the policymakers and talk to the governments. That's not very fair. What has the government been doing or not doing to prepare this? Because it's not new. We've been talking about cellular agriculture 113 years. Why does it take that long to build an infrastructure? That's kind of my question. What are you seeing with the governments and why haven't they prepared sooner? And is there hope on who we need to talk to make sure it changes?
Well, it's a great question. I actually switched from the academy to the government, giving away a professorship with 10-year position less than 2 years ago, asking the same questions and then trying to find out who's in charge of food systems in the government. And once I realized that there's no one person in charge, I asked the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to become Israel's convener for the Food System Summit, which no one didn't compete on it with me. So I think that over the last 2 years, we're doing an enormous work trying to take a more holistic view of food systems and food security above just making sure that low socioeconomic level people have enough calories, or that the farmers that are growing different crops are earning something for doing what they do. As far as I can say, there was no holistic view of food systems until recently. But I must say that after we started, the Ministry of Agriculture now took over, and they are working on it in collaboration with the other ministries, and things are changing really fast. So this is all I can say.
Yeah, maybe that's a good question. And I would say that we might have been in certain inertia from post-World War II, when we needed to increase quickly at very large scale of food production capacities, and there had been a strong focus on industrialization of food, with directing the food toward lower cost, focusing on taste and cost and calories rather than on quality and nutrition. And there's more and more awareness that we've maybe been too far. We've gone too far with pushing the frontiers of efficiencies, cost reduction, and we need to go back to quality and nutrition versus quantities and cost. It's a correction, I believe, which is happening today, which took time just because of inertia of the food system. I would argue that the current food system hasn't been built to feed the people. It has been built to maximize profits and output, and we need to refocus on the outcomes and actually bringing high quality nutrition to anyone, anytime, anywhere, rather than profits.
Thank you. Anyone else? I would like to thank you, Didier, the amazing work that you and Aleph are doing, and the amount of stages that you are taking here in such an important climate convention, that I think that for the first time, food systems are definitely part of the agenda. And to those that maybe don't know, before NOGA changed, food system were at all not part of the agenda of the Ministry of Environmental Protection. There was no recognition whatsoever about the consequences of industrial animal agriculture on the environment. And Gidon, I cannot even start by mentioning all the amount of events and stages that the field has received through the diplomatic network of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So thank you for today, and thank you for all the support. We will continue, and maybe we'll have more news to COP28. Super interesting.